afternoon. I've never had an introduction like that from Andy. It must be coming up to pay review time. So thank you very much, Andy. And thank you for your show of hands earlier. I would like to know, in addition to those two categories, how many people in the audience this afternoon are involved in a voluntary scheme? How many of your businesses have set standards above and beyond what you're expected to achieve? And I can't really see very many in there. Thank you very much. So we've heard this week that the UK needs to decarbonise. We need to get down to 20% of the emissions of 1990. That's a long, long way to go. Some big cuts to make. And that means that every business, not just the big businesses, not just those in the EU scheme, but all business has a long way to go and a lot to do to put it right. So one of the questions this afternoon is to look at how are we motivated, or how are we going to be motivated to achieve these reductions in what we do? Is it going to be through regulation, perhaps through taxation, measures imposed on us? Is it going to be through market mechanisms and perhaps us seeing the business benefits of using those market mechanisms? Or is it going to be through our conscience? Or hopefully perhaps through a combination of those? Now, some of you will have heard from a variety of organisations this week on what they are doing and why, what they're doing in reducing their carbon and in their corporate communications. And there are a variety of approaches are being taken, but I think the common theme that I've heard from them all is that they're all getting on with it. They're taking the challenge and they're making their choices about how they're going to respond. They're not being told about what to do and how to go about it. Now, the session is supposed to be on carbon markets to some extent, and just to put our position at Scott Wilson, we firmly believe that markets are the best mechanism to achieve success. Without markets, which we think are efficient and attractive, without markets, the price of carbon is arbitrary. In other words, government is going to decide, and surely that can't help our business. We were hoping that Copenhagen would set the way forward, but sadly we have to wait a little longer. It didn't bring forward a global trading scheme. But while we wait for that, there are other mechanisms. The EU ETS scheme is here and will be around for a while, if not longer than a while. And in addition to that, in the UK, we have the CRC. Now, there's been plenty of talk about the detail of the CRC from this podium this week, and there'll probably be some more. And the detail of it is probably a bit dull for an after-lunch discussion. So let's move on and talk about some more interesting matters, i.e., what choices do you have in your businesses about meeting the carbon agenda, and how are you going to make them? Now, obviously, all businesses have a hierarchical approach. First of all, you're going to do the easy things that are going to cost you nothing and bring you great benefits. And that may include some minor investment, but principally behavioural change. Then you're going to look at the things where there's a small capital or operational cost, but are going to bring you significant returns generally in reducing your energy bills. And those, of course, are going to be easy things to get your board to agree to spend on, a large rate of return. Then you get to the things where there's a moderate investment and a moderate return. Going to be a bit tricky getting those past the board, but if you add to the return the actual knowledge capital that your organisation is going to achieve in developing some of these projects, then it's probably going to be easier to be sold. So that's the easy stuff. Then you get to the difficult question. How are you going to take the leap from where that's taken you in carbon reduction to where you want to be? Either where you want to be because you're in a scheme or because of a voluntary commitment. And I want to talk about some of the options available to you for that. In principle, there are two options. You either spend more money without a financial return on improving your plant, your business. There's some technology investment. Or you offset. In other words, you pay other people to do it for you. Now, there's a there are pros and cons involved in both of these things. Firstly, on the technology side, in addition to what you're spending, you're actually increasing the volume of that technology usage in the UK, in the first world. Generally, the technology is coming from the first world. You're bringing down the unit price of that technology, admittedly in the first instance for other people to benefit from, but actually the UK and the first world is improving its technological capital. So there are certainly benefits to be gained and claimed from that. Let me just give you an example that I think is quite current, and that's in the house building sector. That's if we still have one in the UK at the moment. But you may be aware that the requirements of new house building is to go for zero carbon. And there was a huge outcry amongst house builders when that first came out because of the extra cost involved in achieving zero carbon houses and their concerns that people wouldn't be able to afford them. Actually, what seems to have happened as this has moved on is that because of the introduction of this technology, because of volumes increase, the unit price has come down, and the market is much more accepting. And actually the figures that are quoted by house builders, who tend to exaggerate, are much, much smaller, and there seems to be an increasing acceptance of the benefits of doing so. So my point is, spending your pound in investing in technology in the UK is not a bad thing. Offsetting. Offsetting through purchasing carbon credits has had fierce criticism. And probably quite rightly in many cases. There have been many examples, some examples of UK organisations that claimed early on they were carbon neutral because they've offset their carbon emissions. Many of whom were buying probably dodgy credits from dodgy parts of the world, and in my view that didn't do the scheme very much good. So let's look at the more official schemes, and that brings me to CDM, Clean Development Mechanism, by which carbon credits created in the developing world and elsewhere can be used to offset our carbon credits in the UK and verified by a UN body. Now, up to now, many credits have been generated in China and Southeast Asia and elsewhere, generally to the benefits of Chinese businessmen and women, people in Southeast Asia, project owners, bankers, etc. And who else? Perhaps I'll leave that to you to answer, and maybe Doug will be talking about that later on. My particular interest is in the future of this market, and I see the future of this market is in places like Africa that has been quite slow to the table. Scott Wilson has been involved in Africa for a number of years in developing infrastructure projects. And I just wanted a bit more audience participation. Just want to run through a few of the projects, the CDM projects that we're developing, and others are, to see if they're the sort of things that you would believe are ethical to invest in. So, show of hands if you please. How about using carbon credits from developing infrastructure for new schools in order to fund those schools? Yes or no? There's a few of you. How about landfill rehabilitation, methane gas reduction on landfills in West Africa, with the credits going to local community? Probably an easy one, yeah. How about doing the same thing in Saudi Arabia? How about energy efficiency in hotels in the Caribbean, with the funds going to fund Caribbean holidays? Not so keen. My point is that you've got to look deep at every project. You've got to look beyond the superficial to see who's developing the credits, benefiting from them, to work out whether that's the sort of project that your organisation will indulge in. But before you go that far away, as a final point, my time's running out, there are many schemes developing closer to home, and I think we'll hear about some of those later on, whereby you can create voluntary credits in your local community by investing in projects for your community to reduce their carbon footprint. There are a growing number of local authorities that are starting to set up opportunities for businesses to invest in locally. As a final conclusion, I would say that there's an amazing array of choices for you to consider. a huge opportunity for you to engage your staff in a corporate responsibility approach to carbon credits. I wish you luck, and if you'd like to come and talk about any of the projects I've mentioned, we're on stand F40, so maybe see you later. Thank you very much for your time.